Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. Recently we hit rank 100 on our Pool 2 only account, so keeping the restriction of staying at collection level 474, even though we were going to be outmatched and go against people that had Pool 3 cards, I wanted to retain and stay in Pool 2 as long as I could to see what decks were going to be best. For those of you that are either just transitioning into Pool 3, or maybe you're still in Pool 2 and you're still working on ranking up. And so today I want to cover the 3 decks that I use to reach rank infinite on my Pool 2 account. And the first one is a Pool 2 destruction kind of counter style deck, in that it runs a lot of kind of cheap cards. It runs a few of the destruction tools in your Bucky Barnes, your Carnage, your Nova, your Deathlock, and your Killmonger, but it also runs a couple of kind of odd choices. So it has Angela, which is going to be great if we continue to buff it up with things like Sentinel. We can continue to play Sentinel in that lane to buff her up and buff the lane up, and then we always have the Nova that we can destroy towards the end of the game. And then typically our last turn play, we're looking to counter either a big Devil Dino or a big any other card, so an Infinite, a big Gamora. We're looking to counter one of those with either a Shang-Chi or an Enchantress. And both of these can typically counter a Devil Dino, so no matter what you draw into, you should be able to have at least one Devil Dino under control, unless they hide it behind a Cosmo lane. At that point, you typically, as soon as you see Cosmo, you want to try to focus and fight for the other 2 locations to see if you can find your win condition. Now, this one did phenomenally for me from 45 to 70. I had, over the course of, I think it was 150-ish games, I had just over an 80% win rate with this deck and an average cube gain of over 3 cubes per game. And so this one worked phenomenally, but after I hit that point and people started having a little bit more strategy behind their decks and where they dropped their cards, I felt like I hit a ceiling. At that point, from 70 to 73-ish, it took several games. I had much closer to a 50% win rate and a much lower cube gain. Even though I was still climbing, it was just much harder at that point. So around that time is whenever I switched to a full destroy package. Now, I leaned all the way in. We still have our Shang-Chi and our Enchantress, but honestly, those very rarely got used because we had bigger plays that we wanted to do on the last turn play. And so typically the play line with this one goes something like you use your Forge to either buff up Mr. Sinister or Sabretooth, depending on your play path. Sometimes you use Mr. Sinister to buff up your Carnage. Sometimes you just use it as a stat stick for your Nova destruction. You have Killmonger to counter any kind of Zoo decks that you run into. You have Shang-Chi and Enchantress for Devil Dino or large minion decks. And this one worked pretty well for me from about 73 to about 80. And at that point, it kind of felt like I hit an edge again. I was going up against a lot of destruction, a lot of mirror matches, and I started feeling like I was getting outpaced for the most part. Now, I did do a video covering this one. If you want to see some gameplay with this deck, I will leave a link in the description below. Go ahead and follow it to that video to get some example gameplays of this deck. But around 80, I started facing a lot of Pool 3 players, a lot of Pool 3 decks, and it just got difficult to climb at that point. And so then the final push that I used to get to Infinite actually surprised me quite a bit. The deck that I used to push from low 80s all the way through 100 in the span of about a day was a Kazar Zoo build. And yes, you are going to sometimes get outmatched, but a lot of times you can counter Killmongers with your armor, with your Cosmo. Now, I did do a video of this one as well. If you want to see some gameplay examples, there will be a link for this one in the description below as well. But typically with this one, the play path, I held my Squirrel Girl to drop alongside maybe a Blue Marvel or an Iron Man on the very final turn. But before that, I did Iceman or Korg as my priority drops. If I had Angela, but I didn't have one of these 2, typically I skipped turn 1. If I had 1 drops out in the open, I dropped armor in that lane. I prioritized dropping armor there. If I had my ongoing abilities, I wanted to either counter a destruction deck, or I wanted to drop this into a lane by itself, so let's say in an Onslaught Citadel, so that 1, the opponent can no longer change that location, but 2, I can drop my ongoing cards without fear of them getting Enchantress. And I could do my Kazar into a Blue Marvel with a final turn Iron Man, or Kazar into Iron Man into Blue Marvel to buff up the rest of the board, and a lot of times that was enough to sneak that much power into the lanes to be able to find our win condition and get a lot of 8 cube wins. Now, I didn't keep stats on this deck because honestly, this one surprised me. I didn't expect for it to do as well as it did. But in the span of about a day, over the course of, I think, 3 hours, I went from 80 to 100. And I faced several decks that ran Killmongers. I faced several decks that ran Devil Dino. But if you can play heads up and you play around those power pushes, a lot of times you can still find that win condition. Now, sometimes if they get the highest high roll, you're going to have to bow out. You're going to have to retreat. This isn't going to win 100% of the games, but a lot of times it can sneak just enough power in to win some of those surprise games where you can get 8 cubes versus 2 or 4 because your opponent retreated. In deciding what deck to pick and what deck you should run, a lot of that depends on what you're seeing in the meta. So if you're still seeing a lot of Devil Dino, I'd say the control or the destruction / counter style deck is going to do very, very well for you. But if you're kind of getting mirror matched, if you're not being able to push a lot of cubes out of those games because the opponent typically retreats, then I would say test out the Kazar Zoo. If you're seeing a lot of Killmonger, then maybe you switch back off of this and into some other style of deck. But with these 3 in your arsenal, I have no doubt that you'll be able to push to infinite, even if you're getting close to pool 3 and if you're facing some pool 3 decks, because these can typically hold their own against the medium performing pool 3 decks. If they get their high roll, definitely bow out. If you're going up against a wave on 5 and you know that they've had some destruction, anticipate a death and something else. At that point, just humbly retreat, try to stay level-headed. Know that if you're staying at 474 to keep in pool 2, you're going to inherently be at a little bit of a disadvantage because your opponent's going to have access to resources that you don't have. But it is absolutely entirely possible to still get rank 100 even with that restriction. And I actually hit infinite on this one before my main account, so it's time to grind some pool 3 content for a little while so that I can rank up on that account as well. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. And as always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.